Hey guys, welcome to Griffith's Retro Gaming with me, Alex Griffiths, and I'm back with another chat interview with a very special guest called Tony Temple, who is he's a record holder for a game called Missile Command in the arcades, and he's kindly agreed to come on. So, without further ado, hi Tony.
Hello. Hi Alex, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to have you on, really is.
Thanks for having me. I like being called a special guest. Makes me feel special.
And so we'll go through the your history, if you like, and how you became the champion of Missile Command. But I do know quite a bit of it already, as Tony has a book out, and we'll go into that a bit later as well. But absolutely fantastic read, Tony. It really is.
Thanks.
So, if you want to just start with how you got into Missile Command, I guess.
Oh God, yeah. I suppose, like a lot of people, when you think about your favourite game, and you sort of think, how did I discover that game? It was a complete accident. So in my hometown in Bristol, when I was a teenager in 1980, 81, Missile Command just happened to be the game that was in my local cafe. So I wandered into my local cafe one day, and they had arcade machines in there, which was sort of something of a novelty. And the one that really stood out to me was this machine, and it had this huge trackball on it, which is just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. So most arcade games obviously have got a joystick and some buttons, but this thing had a trackball, and you could move this trackball, and I was just sort of trying to figure out, what does this do? And then I sort of looked at the screen, and I figured out that this trackball moved this little crosshair around. And that was the thing that sort of drew me to the game. But, I often think, that cabinet could have been anything. Could have been a Defender, it could have been a Pac-Man, it could have been a Space Invaders, but it just happened to be Missile Command. So there was no sort of, coming together of universes, some master plan to start playing Missile Command. It was just the machine that stood out to me in my local arcade.
What else was there that in the arcade at the same time?
So, man, now you're asking. So they had a Gorgar pinball, right. A Williams Gorgar pinball. They had a they had a Buck Rogers arcade machine. They had a Mooncrester, which will be a game I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with. It's a great shoot 'em up. They had a Frogger tabletop as well.
Yeah,
I remember that. And I think they had an Astro Fighter, which is another really cool shoot 'em up game. But yeah, Missile Command was the one that stood out. I think it's probably one thing you can say about Atari classic arcade cabinets, is that they do really stand out.
Yeah,
they're really well designed. They all look very unique. They're not sort of generic looking like a sort of standard arcade cabinet. And they often have the most amazing side art. So I think, I think as a 13-year-old kid, I was just suckered into the whole premise of it. There's this great looking cabinet, fantastic side art, weird control system, 3 fire buttons, and of course the subject matter. It was
very relevant, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a teenage kid in the 80s, there were a few things to be worried about, but I'd say the main one was this sort of fear of nuclear Armageddon. and we all lived in fear of the world coming to an end. And so I think Missile Command, without getting too deep, I think allowed you to sort of play with those thoughts and those fears that you had as a teenage kid. So it was a real sort of Pandora's box of things that sort of drew me to the game and made me start playing it in the early days.
Someone's finally woke up. Evening, guys. I don't know who that is, but yeah, if you just want to put your name. Yeah, so I missed the golden age of the arcade. So I was just explaining to you before we came on that my first interaction with Missile Command was a port to the Spectrum, and totally different to what you'll have played because the Spectrum didn't have the trackball. I remember it being really hard, and it seemed to move in like 90-degree angles, more or less.
Yeah.
You could try and get the diagonal, but it was, and for anyone that hasn't played Missile Command, do you just want to explain what type of game it is?
Yeah, sure. It's so Missile Command, I mean, it's been described as all sorts of things, but I suppose the simple description would be it's a nuclear war simulator, for want of a better phrase. So what the player is, so you don't play as anything. So you don't have a character that's represented on screen. So it's not like Pac-Man or Galaxian or Space where you're kind of moving something. So your job is to protect cities from nuclear annihilation.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a single screen, and you have missiles which are coming down like this from the top of the screen down towards the bottom. And the basic idea of the game is to defend your bases and your cities from this sort of ongoing nuclear assault onslaught.
Yeah.
And the way you do that is you move a crosshair around the screen using the trackball we've just been talking about. So think of a mouse when you move a cursor around a PC screen. You're moving this cursor around and you're trying to intercept the missiles which are floating down the screen towards your cities. And you score points for every missile you shoot down and for every city you're protecting.
Yeah. Does it increase in speed, or do you get more?
Yeah,
more like missiles coming down every.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the intensity of the missiles increases, and then it gets to a point where it's just constantly difficult. It's just constantly coming down at a similar place. And I think there's a couple of things about the game which makes it infinitely playable. First up is everything is completely random, so you will never come across the same scenario twice.
So no patterns to.
There's no patterns to learn. There's no sort of secret tricks to grab extra points. It's just you versus the machine. I kind of liken it to learning how to drive a car. So you can learn to drive, but when you learn to drive, you can never be taught how to deal with every single scenario. Learning to drive just sort of tells you how to use the tools at your disposal. Yeah. So this is a steering wheel. You've got a gear stick here. You've got a brake and an accelerator and a clutch. And so long as you can demonstrate that you can sort of competently use those, they let you out on the streets. Well, your driving instructor can't take you on every road in the country.
No.
There's all sorts of random things that pedestrians, kids running out in front of you, cars slamming on their brakes, people not using their indicators, all that kind of stuff. And Missile Command's very similar. So you have a trackball and 3 fire buttons, but other than that, there isn't really a lot that you can be taught. You've just got to get in there and learn how to play the game. and the scenarios that are thrown at you, you just have to use these tools to deal with them, and on the fly, so you don't get any time to think. You can't sort of park like you can, like that guy John Stoodley who thinks he's good at Pac-Man. I'm joking, John, it's a joke. So on Pac-Man, you can sort of park up and have a rest and maybe have a think, or I don't know, go and have a pee or something. With Missile Command, there's just no time to stop. It's just constantly coming at you, and you've just got to grind it out. So there's that, and also the trackball. So what makes Missile Command such a unique game is its control mechanism, I think. And the trackball was really a sort of very early analog controller. So, you know, if you think about what we play with today, our PS4 and Xbox controllers, think of how much gameplay those control systems add to the games we play today. So it isn't up, down, left, right, fire anymore. It's 360 degrees, and you can swing around, and you can operate a camera and move at the same time. And Missile Command is one of the earliest examples of using that analog control system, which just gives the player some really precise tools to work with and to beat the game.
We've just got a good question actually going on that. I'll just say hi to Phil.
Hello, Phil.
Yeah, so Kev. Good evening, Kev. So what SARS trackball do you prefer, and what are the benefits of the SARS? Now, I think from your book there was two, isn't they? Two different SARS, right. A large and a smaller one. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. So what you'll find if you look at most of the record scores on Missile Command is that they've all been achieved on the full size upright Missile Command cabinet, which is, if you think of Missile Command, is probably the one which everybody thinks of, and that's got the larger trackball. So it's a 4-inch diameter trackball, and that's the one that I prefer. So it's got a good weight to it. You think about controlling it, you see my finger, you can not only use your sort of fingertips to control it, but you can cut the whole thing in your hand, and that, I think, gives you a lot more control over it. The smaller one was placed in the cocktail table version of Missile Command, where you sit opposite each other and play one at a time. And obviously, given the smaller size of that cabinet, they use the smaller trackball within that. It's essentially the same game, but it's just a different play experience. And in order to control the trackball, you're really using more of your fingertips than you are the entire cup of your hand. It's been a while since I've played Missile Command using a smaller trackball. But yeah, it's the larger trackball is the way to go if you're asking me for a recommendation. You can get a lot more control over the trackball.
And how large is the ball? I know you say you can. Is it the size of your hand? Is it that sort of size? I know you say.
Yeah, it's about the size of a. No, it's not. I'm only thinking of a large orange. Stupid example. It's 4 inches across. Is that diameter? Yeah, 4 inches across.
Right.
So think of a ball one side to the other, 4 inches. That's how big it is. Another interesting fact about Missile Command: the actual trackball wasn't specially made for Atari. The trackballs that you find in an upright Missile Command machine are actually Canadian bowling balls. So if you ever go to Canada and play candlepin bowling, you will be bowling a Missile Command trackball down the alley.
Wow.
So that's literally what they used. It's, just the right weight to sit in the machine and to activate the rollers underneath, which sort of sense where you're trying to move the where you're trying to move the crosshair.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Good question, that, Kev. Phil says, what was the last game you played that you actually loved, and how did it compare to the excitement of playing Missile Command for the first time?
Oh, man. Ooh. So the last game that I loved, I'm gonna say Half-Life 2.
Oh,
I think is my favorite game. I also think Mario 64 is a stunning game, and that brings a smile to my face. And I've quite enjoyed Last of Us 2, which I think I'm almost at the end of now. I got that for Christmas. I've been enjoying that, but they're sort of different types of games. I mean, for me personally, what makes Missile Command special is it just gets my adrenaline going in a way that something like Half-Life 2 or Last of Us or Super Mario 64 doesn't. They're fantastic games, and I love them, and I get excited, to play them. But I think in terms of getting my adrenaline going, Missile Command is probably one of the very few sort of arcade style shooter games that even to this day, if I switch it on now and start playing, within 10 minutes I can feel the adrenaline going, because you're just on edge all the time and constantly fighting the machine. Yeah.
That leads us nicely into my next question, actually, which Phil said. So, playing Missile Command for the first time, how did it grab you?
Well, as I go into in my book, my first game of Missile Command was very short, and it was horrible, and I was just destroyed instantly. But I think the sort of subject matter and the theme of it, and bear in mind I was a 13-year-old kid. I was just dumbstruck. It for me, it was like nothing else I'd ever played. And of course the famous end screen, which some of your viewers may or may not be familiar with, but the entire screen explodes from the sort of middle out. It goes a huge explosion and sort of flashes red and white, and it just says these huge words, "The end."
Yeah.
It was just bloody terrifying. I mean, again, I was 13. This didn't happen last week. So I was a kid. I had this sort of inner fear of nuclear Armageddon happening at any point. And just to be able to, in a rather crude way, play at nuclear war, it just grabbed me completely. And the one thing I do remember is when it ended, I remember just sitting there shaking and just completely mesmerized by what I'd just seen. It only lasted about 90 seconds, but it was just like, oh my God, this is my game. And so, I guess Atari grabbed me, and there was no looking back after that. Missile Command was the game I wanted to play from that point.
How did you afford it as well as a 13-year-old kid?
Yeah, well, I probably didn't. So I'm trying to remember what was pocket money like then. I mean, it wasn't a lot. I probably got like £1 a week or something, which would have given me 10 games. So being 10p a go. And I suppose in the early days that didn't last very long. But bear in mind, after 6 months of playing quite significantly, I think by the time it came to the summer holidays, I could make 10 pence last a couple of hours. So
wow.
I guess it wasn't so bad after that point, because my money went further the better I got with the machine. Yeah. So yeah, no, I didn't rob anybody to play the game, but yeah, I guess that was the nice curve of the arcade machine. Well, the sort of benefit for me as a player is the better I got, the longer my limited funds would last. It was obviously bad news for the arcade owner, because I was sitting there playing the bloody thing all day and no one else could get a look in and put any more money in. So yeah, it kind of worked both ways. I guess it was good for me, not so good for the arcade owner.
Yeah. So like I've read stories about people gathering around an arcade machine when someone's doing really well, you know. Was that the case for you? Did you ever have that where people were like coming to watch your game?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of the things which makes the golden age of arcade gaming so unique. And I'm sure you heard this from John Stoodley when he was talking about Pac-Man the other week. The arcades were a really social experience, in a different way to what gaming is now. We're all sitting at home with our headsets on, and I suppose in many ways, yeah, that's a sort of social engaging experience. But imagine that experience of you playing with all your mates on Fortnite, over the internet, but imagine that in person. So you've got 20 people, most of which who are all in the same room as you, gathered around watching you play a game. And I suppose as a kid that was a pretty cool experience, because you're a kid, you like to show off a bit, and you've got all of your peers and some strangers as well gathered around. I remember sitting playing, looking at the screen, and as you move through the game, people would start to notice that you've been on that machine for more than 10 minutes, and so people would start gathering around, and you'd suddenly become aware of these faces reflecting off of the screen you're looking at. So you're not just looking at the game, you're seeing all these sort of faces kind of leaning in from the side, trying to watch your game. And it added to the pressure for sure, because your fear was, well, I'm meant to be the guy who's good at it. Or anybody playing any game that they are reasonably good at, when you had an audience, and sort of word got round, oh, this guy's pretty good at whatever the game was you were playing, and you suddenly become aware that there's a dozen people stood behind you watching you. You're just driven by fear, because you're thinking, I just don't want to screw this up because I'm going to look stupid, So yeah, many times that would happen, and that certainly wasn't unique to me as a good Missile Command player. That was what people did. You went to the arcade to not only play games, but you also went to watch guys who were just amazing at Defender. I'm horrible at Defender and always have been, but to watch somebody who knows what they're doing on Defender, I just fantastic. And that was a game that always drew a crowd, always. Whenever anybody played Defender to any sort of standard, there would always be a bit of a crowd around the machine. That was a definite thing, having people watch you live in person. It definitely added to the pressure.
I bet. At any point, did you think, I am really good at this? Or was it fully a fun thing?
Yeah, I think bear in mind, my universe at that time was the cafe that I played in. So it was probably, there were probably half a dozen regulars, and we were this little sort of, we always met there most days. And so within my group, I was aware that I was much better than anyone else. And then, again, as a kid, if I sort of ventured away from my usual arcade, which was my local cafe, if I went to different arcades in my hometown, just by looking at some of the high scores on the high score table, I used to think, well, I know I can beat that quite easily.
Right.
So yeah, I guess, you know, bear in mind again, this is pre-internet, so you couldn't sort of go online and look up, you know, what's the highest score in the world on Missile Command. But
Yeah.
I think certainly within, as I say, the sort of universe that I operated in, which was basically Bristol, you know, I think I had an inkling that I was pretty good at the game.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, come 1984, 85, all the arcade machines went away.
Yeah.
And we all kind of forgot about them largely. And I certainly did. I didn't play a Missile Command machine for a good sort of 20 or 25 years, until I was in my early 30s and discovered that people were buying these old arcade machines and restoring them and stuff. And that's when I rediscovered Missile Command and went online and sort of searched, you know, what's the world record on Missile Command? Excuse me. And I thought, I think I could beat that. And so it all sort of started again.
What was your first go like after the 25 years? Was
Yeah,
it like
pretty...
riding a bike?
Actually, yeah, I think it was. I think it's one of those games where, I think it's probably like any game. I think anybody watching this would know if you're good at any particular game, whether it's an arcade game or a console game, you'll find that those, you know, fundamental second nature chops that you've got from playing the game are still going to be there. You might be a bit rusty, but I think once you go through a handful of games, it all starts coming back. I haven't played seriously for a long time, and I play the odd game now and then and I'm horrible at the moment. My game is just shot to bits, but you can still feel the same. You know, the trackball feels the same. You know what you need to do in certain scenarios. It's just I'm just a bit loose with my accuracy with the trackball, to, you know, reproduce the scores that I know I'm capable of doing. But yeah, I think it is like riding a bike, and I think that's broadly true for any game like Missile Command. I think especially where it's a shooter, I think anybody can revisit any game that they were pretty good at and get back into their mojo.
Yeah. Just seeing as we've moved on a little bit, I'm just going to take you back to the cafe.
Yeah,
and
sure.
One of my favourite parts in the book, about a robbery, if you want to elaborate on that.
Oh yeah. So this wasn't at the cafe. This was at
Sorry.
That's okay. It was around the same time. So in our town centre, there was an arcade, which happened to be next door to a Polish butcher's, where my auntie worked. And every other Saturday, my mum would send me on the bus with an order for a load of meat to pick up from the butcher's. And so I would get on the bus, go to the butcher's, see my auntie. And the only reason I was happy to do it was because the arcade was pretty much next door to the butcher's.
Yeah.
So I'd go to this so I'd go to the butcher's. I'd hand over whatever the money was to pay for the meat. And my auntie would hand me these bags of meat. And of course, because I was her favourite nephew, she would give me money to play in the arcade next door. So it's great. Everyone's a winner. My mum gets her meat, the Polish butcher gets his business, and I get some money for the arcade. It's like perfect. But it meant I had to go into the arcade with these 2 bags of meat. And so, I'd be walking around the arcade with these big, a good 5 pounds of meat in 2 bags. So I'd go in and, put these bags on the floor and play the machines and what have you. And there's one time I was in there and I was playing a tabletop version of Missile Command, a cocktail table, which had the smaller trackball, to reference the question earlier. And I was just suddenly aware of this commotion going on in the room I was in sort of looked into. And basically the place was being robbed, and it was like 3 or 4 guys with bats, and they were trying to smash through the security screen to nick a load of money. And so, you know, the staff who were sort of, you know, 2 or 3 youngish blokes, yeah, sort of dived in there to sort of obviously protect their takings, and they sort of fight, and a scuffle ensued. And they pinned down one bloke, and the other guys ran off, and sort of meantime the whole place had scattered, and everyone was just told to get out. And I was sitting there playing this game, Missile Command, thinking, well, I'm not leaving. I've paid money to play this game, and that's happening over there, and I'm over here. Forget it. I'm going to carry on playing until someone's going to come and physically throw me out. And of course they didn't. And by this time the police had come in. The place was empty. The shutter had been pulled down. So it was basically the owner of the arcade, a couple of policemen. They'd taken away the guy they'd managed to subdue. And they were obviously taking a statement from them. And I don't know what else they were doing, maybe dusting for prints or something. And either they didn't realize I was there, or they just thought, oh, we'll just let him carry on. And I thought, Christ, I've got this entire place to myself, you know. Like, so there was no more sort of, you know, feeling a bit timid because I was 13, you know, trying to get a game with the 17-year-old kids pushing me out of the way or whatever. So I had this lock-in. So I put this meat on top of the Missile Command cocktail table. It's like a glass top, and happily played away on all the machines I wanted to in my own time. It was just like fantastic. So bear in mind, 13, and you're like, God, I've got an entire arcade to myself. So yeah, that was the meat robbery story. And when my money had sort of run out, I picked up these 2 bags of meat, and all of the juice had run out of the, like, meat juice had dripped out of the bags onto the top of this table. It just looked like a pool of pig's blood or beef blood or whatever blood it was from. Yeah. And I just went out and asked them to open the door, and they sort of looked at me like who the hell are you and where have you come from? And anyway, they let me out the door. So I just sort of left with this pool of blood on top of this cocktail table. And yeah, I just sort of wondered after whether they thought that was something to do with the robbery or not. I don't know, but
that would be interesting in forensics, finding out it was pigs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That was pretty interesting. Yeah, interesting experience.
So we've got another question from Phil. Did you ever have chance to play the unreleased Missile Command 2 that was field tested?
Phil, I have not. No, I haven't. So Missile Command 2 never got released. The gameplay that they tried to come up with was I think it was like a head-to-head game where 2 players play at the same time. So you imagine me on one side and Alex, you on the other, and we both got our own trackball and 3 fire buttons. I think, as I understand it, it was either cooperative where you're both trying to protect both sides of the screen. So you've got missiles to protect, you've got cities to protect on your side of the screen, and I've got cities to protect on my side of the screen, and there's missiles coming from the middle of the screen towards both of our sets of cities. And I think the idea is I've got to protect all of mine, and then when I've done mine, I've got to try and come and help you, or there may have been some sort of head-to-head mechanic in there somewhere. Yeah, it was it was only released in prototype form, and I believe it was put out to play testing, but they just couldn't get the gameplay mechanics right. And for many years it was thought to be long lost, and then somebody found a PCB, and I think another collector found a set of ROMs, and they managed to hook it up to a generic head-to-head cabinet with I think they used an Atari soccer cabinet which has trackballs on either side of it, And so yeah, they managed to get it going, and I believe it was shown in an arcade event in California around sort of 2016 or something like that. But no, I heard it was going to be there, and I was just dying to jump on a plane and go and play it. But alas, it was not to be. But yeah, I'd love to see that one day. As the code is very buggy apparently, and it was obviously an unfinished game. But yeah, it's an interesting footnote to the Missile Command story for sure.
So let's just go back to we'll go to the book. We'll go to the way you've wrote it. You start off with a history of Missile Command. So let's forget about like now, but you went after you broke the record, or was it before you broke the record? You went to meet the developers, didn't you, of Missile Command? How was that for you as a fan?
Yeah, it was it was quite an experience actually. So Dave Toyer is the guy who wrote Missile Command. He also wrote Tempest, and a game called APB, which is slightly less well known, and another game called iRobot. So Dave Toyer wrote the code for Missile Command and obviously designed the game. I'd been aware of his name for some time, and I'd tried to reach out to him by email a few times, but Dave is a man of few words and doesn't often talk about his time at Atari. If you go onto Google and try and Google an interview with Dave Toyer, you won't find very many. And I sort of started having some sporadic email conversation with him, and I introduced him to a friend, Paul Drury, who writes for Retro Gamer, and he managed to sort of squeeze a kind of interview out of him for Retro Gamer magazine. And he started becoming familiar with who I was, probably because I didn't leave him alone, just kept emailing him. And he'd respond to the odd email. And when I had the idea for the book and I started writing it, I was just thinking, you know, I kind of know the story, but I think for it to be really credible, I really need to speak to this guy, Dave Toyer. I really do need to, try and ask him questions over email at the very least, or if I could do a Skype call with him, that would be even better. Or, heavens forbid, actually go and meet him. That would be great, and that would tick a big box for me as well. And I kept hassling him about this in a very British way. I wasn't too overboard with it. And in the end, I said, look, I'm halfway through my book, and I'd really like to talk to you. And it would be, I must have started to sound really desperate. And then he eventually replied, and he said, okay, Tony, look, no problem. Anytime you're passing over here, which is California, I will be glad to take you out to lunch and we can talk Missile Command. And I still don't know if he said that because he thought this idiot's not going to come to California, so that's kind of like me. I've kind of done, And so I just immediately replied and said, "Great, I'll be there in March." And so I'm still not sure if he was serious or not, but anyway, so that was that. So I booked a flight. I was planning on going there anyway, so I should point out I didn't just get on a plane to go and meet him for lunch. I was planning on a holiday, so it was a nice bonus for that trip. And I went with a friend, James, and we had a couple of days organized in Vegas, and we were doing a couple of other things in and around California. So we arranged to meet him, and the rest is history. We had a nice lunch, had a great chat about Missile Command. He was as interested in meeting me as I was him, actually, as it turned out. So I think he was quite fascinated that there are players out there who can master arcade games, and I think he was quite curious about what's the mindset of someone who wants to play a game to the point that they break the world record, or can just play it for hours, and I think it was a new conversation for him, because I imagine he's spoken to many people over the years. Oh yeah, I remember Missile Command. That was one of my favorites. But I think he was interested in, so what tactic do you use? How do you move the trackball? He was interested in how I held the trackball and how I moved the trackball, and he was also interested in, and this was really interesting. He was really interested in some of the bugs. So there's a number of bugs in Missile Command which I go into in the book, and of course many of those he wasn't aware of, because when he wrote the game, they could only play test it so far, because there's a limited amount of time for anybody to get good at it, to get to a point where they might discover a bug. And of course, once he designed the game, that was it. Well, done. Someone else is going to build the cabinet and start selling it. I'm going to go and write Tempest. And so he was really interested in talking to me about some of the bugs which occur in the game, the deeper into it that you get. And that was an interesting conversation, and he was you could see his mind going of, oh, I wonder why that would have happened. And it was like a really nerdy conversation, but it was great. And Dave's a lovely guy. He's a man of few words, but he's just a really nice guy. And we had such a good chat, and he was very gracious with his time. He paid for lunch, which was even better. And he was good enough to write the foreword in my book, which was just a real honor. So yeah, it was great. It's probably the sort of highlight of my gaming career is the wrong phrase. Of course, I haven't got a career in gaming, but it's the sort of highlight of my involvement in the sort of arcade collecting hobby was to be able to meet the guy who wrote the game that I hold the world record on. And it was just a really good experience, and great, really great guy.
Absolutely. I can see why he would be interested as well, because like arcade games were designed to take money, obviously. And just like the mindset of someone wanting to be a record holder at a game that's designed to take your money is,
and you raise an interesting topic there, Alex, around arcade games and the business model back in the 80s. So arcade machines were there to make money, nothing else. They weren't made to become cultural icons in 40 years' time.
No.
And they were a piece of equipment which was placed in a unit in a retail setting for kids to go in and to put money in. And so in order for that to keep going, you have to design games that are easy to learn but difficult to master, which was Atari's sort of mantra, if you like.
Yeah.
So and Missile Command was a great example of that. So your first game of Missile Command, you're drawn to it. It's got bright lights. It's got fantastic side art. It's bright colors. It's about nuclear war. It's 1980. I've got to play this. So you put a coin in, you start playing, you're panicking, you're sweating, and it's all over. And you go, wow, well, I'm going to find another quarter in. I'm going to have another go. I might get through the first wave on my second go, and I'm going to put another. And you start getting better, but but the difficulty is, fine-tuned that well that when you lose, it's making you think, damn, if I could just have one more go, I know I can do a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that's what the business model was based on. But it did mean that arcade cabinets had a very short life. So you wouldn't expect to see Missile Command in an arcade in the 80s for more than 9 months, I would suggest. And a lot of operators talk about the sort of drop off in earnings. So they start very high, they would continue for 6 months, and then they would suddenly drop off. And there's a few reasons for that. One would be idiots like me who just got too good at the machine. So that means rather than 10 coins going in every half an hour, you're only getting 3 coins in every half an hour, because instead of the game lasting 90 seconds, people are playing it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. And so suddenly there's this big piece of equipment in this guy's shop that's just taking up space and is not making any money. So it's time you got to take it out the back and put a bullet in its head and replace it with Defender, or something that's not been on the floor before. And I guess ultimately the arcade manufacturers just kind of ran out of ideas, and people could start playing these games in their homes.
Yeah.
There was a point in arcade history where there was a belief that manufacturers could just throw any old game in a cabinet and people would put coins into it. But I think over time players got more discerning, and so they were going back to the games that they loved to play.
Yeah.
They went back to the Pac-Mans and the Tempests and the Missile Commands and the Space Invaders, and they weren't prepared to try something new like Zwakkery or I don't know, Joust, or sort of more recent games. So yeah, I guess I was an example of every arcade operator's nightmare, because I would go in and sit in front of Missile Command, pull up a stall, put 10p in, and that's it. No one else is playing that game, for the next 2 hours. Yeah.
Let's talk about your record then. So,
yeah,
how did it come about? So, was you actively going for that record? I know you did touch upon it a bit earlier, but was you gunning for it? Was you thinking, I can do that?
Yeah, I looked up the record on when I bought my own cabinet. And I started playing again. I was thinking, I'm still pretty good at this game, and I wonder if there's a world record. Who is the best Missile Command player in the world? And I went on Google and came across Twin Galaxies, who at the time were known as that was the place you went to if you wanted to beat a world record, and they would track video game world records. And I saw the score and I thought, I reckon I can do that. And I got close to it and sent that score in. And in the meantime, a guy called Walter Day, who was heading up Twin Galaxies at the time, contacted me, and he said, we're submitting scores to the Guinness Book of World Records this year, and I think they would be interested in a new Missile Command world record, especially if it was beaten by a Brit, because obviously Guinness World Records is a British publication. And he said to me, we have to submit the scores to Guinness by the end of March, and this was like the middle of February, I think.
All right.
So it's like, okay, so no pressure then. I was pretty close.
How close was you? Can you remember?
So I think my score was like 1.5 million, and the world record was 1.69 million. So I was
right.
about 90% of the way there comfortably.
Yeah.
And so I guess it was that extra kind of pressure of like, wow, this the incentive I had was potentially my name might get into the Guinness Book of World Records, which I hadn't even considered before, but thought, well, yeah, why not? And so that was the thing that spurred me on. So yes, it was a good couple of hours most evenings where I'd sit in front of my machine. I'd set up a mini DV camera which took the mini tapes, and I'd set that up, press record, start playing. The game would end in failure. Rewind the tape, reset the machine, switch it back on again, start playing. And I try to get sort of 2 or 3 games in most evenings. So it was probably a couple of hours a night, I would say. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks into playing that it just all kind of came together, and I beat the score. I got 1.9 million points. Submitted
Wow.
the tape. There was a bit of fanfare, and then Walter said, "Good job, well done. We're going to submit your score along with a bunch of others, but it's really up to Guinness which ones they choose to print." It's like, oh, right, okay. So it's not like a guaranteed dead cert then. It's just like you may or may not. Anyway, fortunately for me, they printed my score. So I'm in the 2007 Guinness Book of World Records.
That's awesome. Was there any conditions? Like, did you have to have a certain setting, and how did you prove that?
Yeah, so oh man, that's a whole hornet's nest, Alex, you've opened up there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yes, when you attempt a world record on a classic arcade title, there are obviously certain rules you have to follow, and there are certain settings on the machine that you have to have set, and that you have to demonstrate that you have the correct settings on the machine in order for your score to be valid. So there's a number of settings on Missile Command. The record that I hold on Missile Command is what's known as tournament settings, and on tournament settings you get no bonus cities.
Right.
So if any of you have played Missile Command in the arcades, you will have probably would have played on the usual settings, which gives you a bonus city every 10,000 points. On the setting that I play, there are no bonus cities. So it's kind of like Space Invaders. You get your 3 lives. You don't get any more. That's it. You've just got those 3 lives. Once those lives have gone, it's game over. So there are small switches on the game's printed circuit board that you can set to set some of these options. So how many bonus cities, no bonus cities or some bonus cities. And there's we could have another 3-hour chat about trackball settings. So, I mean, just very quickly, there's a dip switch setting which affects the sensitivity of the trackball.
Yeah. And
at the time when I got my record, it wasn't required that you had to state which of those settings you were using. And that just created a whole bunch of controversy and fun and games, which I go into in the book, which I won't bore you with now. But yes, it is crucial to make sure that those settings are correct. And when you finish your game, you take your camera off of the tripod. This is if you're recording a score as opposed to playing it live. And you've got to go into the machine and prove that the dip switch settings you're supposed to have are correctly set on your game. Otherwise, the score's disqualified. So,
right.
So it's quite an involved process.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the sensitivity, because from an outsider looking in, would it really matter whether it's too sensitive or not, because that's just a preference on, or is the tactic to that?
Yeah, you've answered the question, really, Alex. Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why there's so much controversy around the sensitivity of the trackball is because it seems Atari couldn't make its mind up which of the two settings were the correct setting.
Right.
So there are three versions of the manual for Missile Command. The arcade operator manual that you got when you bought a Missile Command machine. So you get the machine, and you get the operating manual, like a washing machine.
Yeah.
And the first version of the manual states the setting of that switch doesn't matter. The second version, print version 2 of that manual, says the switch should be in the on position, and the third print version of the manual, version 3, says it should be in the off position.
Right.
So you can see, like, well, what the hell? So what is it? Is it? Does it not matter? Does it matter? Should it be on? Should it be off? Now, my machine came with version 3 of the manual, so naturally, I followed the instructions in the manual.
Yeah.
And mine was set to the off position, which makes it more sensitive. So it moves the cursor a little bit faster around the screen. There are other guys out there who are more used to the trackball being less sensitive. So in basic terms, you have to put more effort into the trackball to get it to move from one side of the screen to the other. But the reality is it's really down to preference. So personally, I don't like the other setting, because it feels like I'm always fighting the machine. It just doesn't feel right, and it doesn't seem to me that a designer of the game would design it in such a way that you're like, oh yeah, like I'm losing this game because of the controls. This is not my fault. This is the machine's fault. Whereas for me, the other setting, the off setting, is just feels just right, and it's just the right speed. So what you give up when you play on the setting that I play on is accuracy. Yeah. So it's a lot more difficult to control. So I mean, the best way I can describe it is if you go into the settings on your laptop and you adjust the pointer speed of your mouse.
Yeah.
So you'll know, you can set it so that you move your mouse just a tiny little bit and the whole cursor moves right across the screen. Same on Xbox and PS4. When you go into the settings of a first-person shooter game, you can adjust the speed at which you look around.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. So I don't know, I'm sure there's guys out there who want it set to the maximum, so I can just move around really, really quickly. And there are other guys who are like, oh, this is just too quick. It's making me feel sick. I need to slow that movement down a bit. And there really isn't much in it. It's probably about 10%. But if you're used to one setting, the other setting just feel, I can't control it with the other setting. It's just doesn't work. Yeah. So when this was pointed out after I got my record, by the way, Twin Galaxies decided that they needed to address it. So what they said was that particular aspect of the setting was down to player's choice.
Yeah.
So if you want to play on the first setting, that's absolutely fine. If you want to play on the second setting, that's fine as well. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because there's pros and cons for each, isn't there? So
yes, without doubt. Yeah.
So the world record, you obviously beat somebody. How did they take it when they found out that their record had gone?
This sounds like a leading question to me, Alex. Yeah, so one of the characters I introduce in the book is a guy called Roy Schilt, who is better known as Mr. Awesome. And Roy was the world record holder on Missile Command from 1985, 1984, up until I got the record, which was 2006.
So he was the king, wasn't he?
Is that right? 2006. Yeah. So he was world record for 30 years. Is that, have I got that, my maths right? 20 years. Sorry.
Yeah.
He was a world record for he was a world record holder for 20 years, and then I came along and beat it. And Roy is he's quite the character, and he was, let's just say, I think his nose was put out of joint a bit.
Yeah.
And so therein began a world of fun and games back and forth with Roy, who wasn't happy with the fact that I beat his record. He wasn't happy about the fact that I play on a different setting that he claims to play on. So he claims that he got his record on the other setting, which, you know, somehow invalidates my score according to him, but not according to anyone else. He is quite the character. So he's kind of, you know, he's the complete opposite to Billy Mitchell, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He's everything that Billy Mitchell isn't, but he holds the same sort of stature. He's sort of up there in terms of the classic arcade gaming community as, you know, one of the more colourful characters.
Yeah.
And I go into it quite a bit in my book, obviously, because he's been quite an integral part of the story, really. But I would say he made my journey with Missile Command far more interesting than it would have otherwise been. He's a forceful character. He has a lot to say for himself, and he's quite the guy. Yeah,
it's absolutely fascinating read. It really was. I couldn't put the book down. I was like, this is brilliant. You know?
Yeah, but he I've never met him, which is a shame. I tried really hard to meet him. I went on holiday in 2019 to California again, and I was going for like 10 days, and I just thought to myself, well, you know, I've never met this guy, but he was instrumental in me getting the world record. You know, there's no denying it. Roy was an amazing Missile Command player, and if he hadn't have set the score as high as he did, I probably wouldn't have, you know, bothered to keep going to try and get as high score as I possibly could on Missile Command. So I actually owe him quite a bit, and I've never met him. And I suppose there's an argument to say, well, you probably don't want to meet him because, you know, I think he's generally quite upset with me for beating his record. But I thought, you know what, why not just reach out to him and, you know, buy him a beer? So I emailed him and said, hey, Roy, I hadn't spoken to him for a good 3 years on email.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, look, I'm going to be in town. I'd love to buy you a beer and a burger. You know, how about I come and take you out to lunch and we can have a chat? And I thought, you know, if nothing else, I can maybe get a picture with him for the book, which would be great. You know, here we are, you know, 20 years later, we're friends. Everything's fine, you know. And he was very polite at first, and then he just went off the rails and started talking about conspiracy theories and how I'm, according to him, I know everybody at Guinness, and somehow it's my world record was one big conspiracy to remove him from the Guinness book, and it was just bananas. And he threw his toys out his pram and refused to meet me for lunch, and that was that. So yeah, that was a real shame, but to be expected, I think.
Yeah. I've got a question off Phil. What's my highest score on Missile Command?
That's a good question, Phil. What is your high score on Missile Command, Alex?
No one needs to know, do they? Not as high as yours. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, I think for the final question, where has having the record led you, and where do you see yourself going with? Do you do a lot of chats like this and I don't know, promotional things? Do you do anything like that?
I haven't really. I mean, if you talk about the book, it's the book sold really well. I'm just really surprised at how many people have bought a copy. I think it sort of generated quite a bit of interest again in Missile Command. I was lucky enough to get the book out at the back end of last year, which was the 40th anniversary. So I think there was a bit of a buzz about a lot of these games. So I think that probably helped. So it's funny, John Stoodley has been hassling me to start playing again and to do some streaming on Twitch. Yeah. And he won't let it go. So I think at some point soon I'm going to have to get the webcam out, set it up, and play a few games on Twitch just to see how my game is. Last time I tried it was just horrible. But maybe with a bit of pressure of a few people watching, I might step up to the plate like I used to. So yeah, but yeah, I'm still doing the blog, arcadeblogger.com.
Yeah.
And that's still going well. So that's still taking up quite a bit of my time. But yeah, sorry, to answer your question, no, but I'm sure John's not going to let me get away with not playing Missile Command at some point soon. So yeah, maybe when I get that figured out and set up, I'm sure it'll be in the next couple of weeks or so. I'll let you know, Alex, and we can tell everyone to tune in, and you can watch how horrible my game is. And then wonder, really, is this guy really the world record holder? He's shit.
Yeah, it won't be any worse than any of ours. Don't worry. So yeah, the book is fantastic. I just want to thank you for coming on and talking about it.
Thanks, Alex.
You said that you've got a little promotion code for the viewers.
So any of you guys, anybody part of Alex's group here, Griffo's Retro Gaming, if you go to arcadeblogger.com/Griffo, you see what I did there? There's a page there just for you guys, and you can buy the book at a 10% discount. So it's even including Amazon, that's the cheapest place you can buy the hard copy of the book. It's I think the thing that makes the book stand out, I think, if I can say so myself, is it is a proper book. So it isn't like most retro gaming books, which are fantastic, but which are more sort of like coffee table type things with just tons of pictures and a little bit of writing. This is a sort of proper 77,000 word book with a bunch of color images that tell the story of the development of Missile Command, and as we've been discussing my own journey with the game. So yeah, arcadeblogger.com/Griffo. There's a page there, and you can buy a copy of my book with 10% off, and I'm happy to sign every copy if you'd like me to do that.
I'm sure they will. I'll put a link to that as well. But yeah, fantastic read and a fantastic stream. I've really enjoyed it. Really have, Tony.
Me too. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's good to talk. Yeah, very happy to talk about Missile Command any time of day. So thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
No worries. So I'd like to just, if you want to stay on as well, Tony, I'd just like to thank everybody for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I'll see you again very soon with another guest, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks. So Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you again very soon.